All right, so fun fact is that in my first year of gardening, I harvested a whopping 1 tomato from my garden over the entire season. Now, since then, with all of the experience and experiments that I've done over the last 5 years or so, I've learned a lot, and ultimately has resulted in not only getting these big and beautiful bounties and harvests and yields, but has also helped me fall in love with gardening. And so what I want to walk through today are 6 of my learnings that I wish I knew at the very beginning when I was planning my first garden, so that you can have a much better first garden than just getting 1 tomato. So as we get started on these 6 learnings, if you have any questions at any point, please leave those down in the comments, because I start every single day by answering every single comment that we get on YouTube. So you'll get an answer from me nice and quickly over there. But to get started, that first learning is to grow what you love. And so what you might find over the course of the coming months is that you're going to go to a nursery, and you're either going to be looking at all the seeds that are available or the seedlings that you could buy to then bring home and plant into your garden. And it's really exciting. I have next to no control when I'm in the nursery, and I end up buying all these different seeds and seedlings, only to then realize a couple months later I'm looking at my garden, I'm like, why on earth am I growing celery? I've only bought celery like once in the last 3 years for a Thanksgiving dinner. Why am I growing this? And the reason why this is important is because what we're going to notice as we get into the season is that gardening square footage and that space is precious real estate. And so therefore we want it being dedicated to the vegetables that we absolutely love to eat. So my recommendation to you is to spend a couple of minutes kind of just slowing down and jotting out the vegetables that you absolutely love to eat the most, and put those at the very top of your priority list for this coming season. Okay, so the second learning is to start small. And so I know that there's a lot of pictures out there that show these big and beautiful gardens with so much growing in it and these huge bounty and harvest baskets, but what isn't shown is that there's a lot more weeding that needs to happen, that there's a lot more watering that needs to happen, that there's a lot more pruning, a lot more trellising, a lot more infrastructure that needs to be built and ultimately purchased. So it becomes a lot more expensive and a lot more work. And in the first kind of year of gardening, everything's going to be new. And so it's very easy for a larger garden to feel very overwhelming early on. And the last thing that we want is for the garden to feel like a chore. We want the garden pulling you out there, because that's how you're going to fall in love with it. So my recommendation to you on this front is that if you're in a townhouse or you're in a patio, view that as a huge blessing in disguise, that you're going to be kind of forced to start a little bit smaller, and it's going to pull you into a larger and larger space in the years to come. And then if you are in a house with a backyard, and maybe you already have raised beds or you just have the yard, don't feel pressured to have to fill up every one of those raised beds or use your whole backyard space. Start with just a fraction of it. Focus on really working that smaller space well. And as a result, you'll feel less overwhelmed, it won't feel like a chore, and then you'll apply all those learnings into the subsequent seasons, and that's where the garden will get larger and larger, as will the bounties, harvests, and yields. All right, so the third learning is proper spacing for your plants. And I did a whole video on this topic because it's one of the most common kind of problems or challenges that is experienced by new gardeners. Because what ends up happening is that we transplant our babies into the garden, and we look at our garden and we're like, oh my gosh, there's so much more soil, so much more space that I could be putting plants in here, and we end up then crowding it with a whole bunch of other plants. But as those plants sit under that hot summer sun for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, what looked like it was maybe a little bit empty at the beginning is very quickly stuffed to the brim. And if we put too much in there, it looks good for a hot moment, but what ends up happening very quickly is that those plants begin to compete with one another. They're competing for water from in the soil, they're competing for nutrients in the soil, they're competing for sunlight from up above, and ultimately they're actually suffocating one another from an airflow perspective. So very quickly, it actually ends up causing a lot more harm than good. They're not set up to thrive. So my recommendation to you on this front is to download our garden planning guide, because that has a space planner in it where it's going to tell you for every vegetable exactly how much space to be giving to it so that they're set up to thrive for the season ahead. Okay, so our fourth learning is to feed the soil. And so you remember that tomato that I harvested in my first year of gardening? Well, it didn't even taste good. Everybody talks about, oh, a homegrown tomato tastes so good. This one tasted absolutely miserable. I was really proud of it, but it tasted miserable. And the reason behind that was because I planted it into the soil and I did nothing. I did not amend it or feed into the soil anything whatsoever. And so when we think about our plant babies, the soil, that's really like its lunchbox. And so when we send our baby out to school or into the garden, we want to make sure that that lunchbox is full of nutrients, full of microbes, so that it can absolutely thrive for the upcoming season. And the way that we go about doing that is by really three things. First, we want to be adding 1 to 2 inches of compost onto the top of the bed as we move into the springtime. This is going to be a really nice boost of nutrients as well as microbial life. The second piece is that when we transplant it, the hole that we dig to place it into, we want to put 1 handful of worm castings and 1 tablespoon of an organic fertilizer such as our 444 superfood. And then we want to repeat that process at the base of the plant. So we're going to sprinkle 1 handful of worm castings around that main stem where it goes into the ground. And then we're also going to sprinkle 1 tablespoon of that 444 superfood or an organic fertilizer. And by doing this, it is ensuring that your plant baby has all of the nutrients, all of the microbes that it needs to be growing big and strong and thriving into the season. Alrighty, so that is 4 down, 2 to go. And just before we get to those last 2, for those of you that I have not met before, I'm Jordan from Mind and Soil, where we're looking to introduce 1 million individuals to mindful gardening. So if you're looking for more peacefulness, more calmness, more restoration in your life, I really encourage you to subscribe to our channel here, because we put out new videos every single week to be helping you get your hands dirty, feeling comfortable and confident in the garden, and therefore more quickly tapping into the mental health benefits of gardening. So with that being said, let's dive into that 5th learning, which is to use grow bags or containers in your first season of gardening. Now, the reason why we want to potentially be doing this is because the sun plays such an important role in how well our plants will grow. But before gardening, it's probably pretty likely that you haven't tracked the sun or necessarily know what parts of the garden get the most sun. This happened to me when I moved to this house that I'm in, and I planted my garlic in the absolute worst place. I might as well have been growing it in a shed with how little sun they were getting, because at that point I simply did not know which parts of the garden got the most sun. So by planting in, say, grow bags or containers that you can move around, as the sun gets higher in the sun closer to the peak of summer, you're going to be able to move those grow bags into the part of your backyard or your patio, your townhouse that get the most sun. And that's going to give you really good insight, really good learnings to then be building any more permanent infrastructure such as a raised bed in the area that is getting the most sun. So those grow bags, those containers, they allow you to grow, but they also allow you to really learn the sun in that first year, first season. All right, and so the 6th and final learning for you, and it might be a little bit of a surprising one, and that is to let go of expectations. And so when we think back to my first season of gardening, if I was hoping for this huge bounty and harvest of yield, but ended up with only 1 tomato, I probably would have been pretty let down, and I could have actually ended up kind of like resenting gardening or not falling in love with it. But on top of that, I could have applied the 5 learnings that I've already gone through, and Mother Nature could have simply had other plans. There could have been a cold snap in June. There could have been a heat dome in July. And that crop that you'd been looking forward to trying and to eating could just get completely wiped out over the course of 2 or 3 days and be 100% out of your control. And so having this expectation to a big bounty harvest or yield could ultimately prevent you from falling in love with gardening. And so my recommendation to you on this front is to really focus all of your expectations and your energy around simply spending time in the garden, enjoying getting your hands dirty, and learning this new skill of gardening. And what you're going to find is that when you approach it in that way, and as each season compounds and you get all the learnings and all the experiences from one season rolling into the next, simultaneously your bounty, your harvest, your yield is going to increase year over year. Just as for myself, it started with 1 tomato, but now as we're on the eve of the upcoming gardening season, I still have a freezer full of frozen vegetables and canned goods in my pantry that I need to be working through before the upcoming season. So that bounty, that harvest, that yield. It's going to come for you, and it's going to come as a byproduct of falling in love with gardening. So that's everything for today here, folks. I really hope that this has been useful. Again, if you do have any questions, please leave those down in the comments and I'll get a response to you super quickly. And then if this has been valuable to you, it'd mean the world to me if you shared it with a friend, because that really, really helps with our mission of introducing 1 million individuals to mindful gardening. And then lastly, if you do want to go through our process of planning the perfect garden, you can check out this video right over here, and it's going to take you through step by step. Plus it has our guide, which you can download and have on hand. So it's everything for now. I can't wait to catch you on the next one. Go get those hands dirty, and I'll see you soon.